The year was 1888. The place was a small, forgotten village tucked into a high valley of the Swiss Alps, a place where the sun was a fleeting visitor between autumn and spring. On a cold November morning, Elias Vogel was committing an act of madness. He stood before his own cottage, a sturdy structure of stone and timber that had housed his family for 3 generations, and he was methodically dismantling its southern wall, not repairing it, dismantling it, with a crowbar and a quiet determination that the villagers found more unsettling than any loud shouting. He was prying away the very bones of his home. The master builder of the village, Magnus Steiner, a man whose hands had shaped half the homes in the valley, stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of disbelief. Around him, a small crowd of neighbors murmured. They watched as Elias, a clockmaker by trade, not a carpenter, began framing a new set of windows. But these were not normal windows. They were tilted, angled downward at a severe and unnatural degree, aimed more at the frozen earth than the pale winter sky. It was an absurdity, an offense against common sense. The villagers had already given it a name, Vogel's Folly. Some called it the glass trap, certain the first heavy snow would shatter the panes and doom the family within. But Elias Vogel continued his work, his movements as precise and unhurried as the gears of the timepieces he so carefully assembled. He consulted a small dog-eared notebook filled with calculations and diagrams, numbers that meant nothing to the onlookers, but everything to him. What did this humble clockmaker, a man who dealt in brass cogs and delicate springs, understand about heat and light that generations of hardened mountain builders had missed? And how would his strange, downward-gazing windows prove not to be a folly, but a revolution born of cold, hard physics? Hit that subscribe button right now if you want to uncover more forgotten secrets of historical engineering, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. To understand the madness of Elias Vogel, you must first understand the tyranny of the Alpine winter. It was not merely cold, it was a physical presence, an occupying force that laid siege to the village for 5 months of the year. The sun, so generous in summer, became a distant, mocking disk. It rose late and set early, its arc low and shallow, its rays skimming the southern ridge of the valley, but rarely pouring into it with any true warmth. Life was dictated by a relentless calculus of fuel. A family's wealth was not measured in coin, but in the size of its woodpile. From the moment the first snow fell, the rhythm of the village was the bite of the axe and the groan of the saw. The forests, once plentiful, were receding. Every year the men had to venture further, climb higher, to find the timber needed to survive. Inside the stoutest homes, the cold still found a way in. It crept through the floorboards and seeped through the thick stone walls. It painted the inside of the window panes with intricate, beautiful patterns of frost that were a testament to the home's heat loss. A rime of ice would form on sleeping blankets where a person's breath had condensed and frozen in the night. Ink froze in its wells. Water left in a bucket overnight would be a solid block by morning. The heart of every home was the Kachelofen, a massive masonry stove that, once heated, would radiate warmth for hours. But it was a hungry beast. Feeding it was a full-time occupation, and the air in the cottages grew thick with smoke and soot. It was a humid, heavy warmth, a stark contrast to the clean, biting cold outside. This was the accepted reality. It was the way things had always been. The struggle was a part of life, a virtue even, a sign of one's strength and endurance against the harshness of the mountains. Elias Vogel, however, was not from this tradition. He had been born in the valley, yes, but he had spent 15 years of his young adulthood far away, working as a technician at a naval observatory on the coast. His job had not been building houses or felling trees. His job had been to track the precise movement of stars, to calculate the declination of the sun, to understand the celestial clockwork of the solar system. He had spent thousands of nights looking up, charting the predictable, elegant arcs of heavenly bodies. He understood that the sun was not just a source of light, but an engine of immense power, and he knew its position in the sky on any given day, at any given hour, was not a mystery, but a mathematical certainty. When he returned to his ancestral home after his father's death, he brought this different perspective with him. He saw the villagers fighting the cold with brute force, with sweat and wood smoke. They saw the sun as a weak and unreliable friend in winter. Elias saw it as a powerful ally that they were simply failing to properly invite into their homes. He watched the pale winter sun cast long shadows, its light striking the vertical walls and windows of the village at a shallow, oblique angle. Most of its energy, he calculated, was simply reflecting off the glass in the wood, glancing away into the sky. It was a tragic waste. He knew the conventional wisdom was flawed. The standard south-facing windows were built to let in light, but they were almost useless for capturing heat in the dead of winter. The low sun's rays, striking the vertical glass at an angle of less than 30 degrees, lost the majority of their thermal energy to reflection. At night, those same large panes of glass became thermal drains, radiating precious, hard-won heat from the stove back out into the freezing darkness. The villagers were fighting a war on two fronts, struggling to generate heat while their homes actively bled it away. Elias Vogel believed he could build a better trap, not a trap for snow, as the villagers jeered, but a trap for the sun itself. His construction began with a foundation of precise calculation. He did not guess. He knew. From his observatory data, he knew the exact angle of the sun at solar noon on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, at his specific latitude. It was a paltry 22.8 degrees above the horizon. To capture the maximum amount of energy, a surface needed to be perpendicular to the sun's rays. A vertical window was off by more than 67 degrees. It was an engineering absurdity. So, Elias framed his new windows at a tilt of 67 degrees from the vertical. They leaned back into the house, their glass faces angled almost directly at the low winter sun's path. To an observer, they looked like they were bowing to the ground. To the laws of physics, they were a perfect receptacle. Magnus Steiner approached one afternoon, his face etched with genuine concern. Magnus was not a cruel man. He was the guardian of the village's safety. He had built the church roof that had withstood the great avalanche of '72. His reputation was built on solid, proven methods. "Elias," he began, his voice low and respectful, but firm. "What is this? The first heavy snow will collect on that glass. The weight will shatter it before Christmas. You are putting your wife and children in danger." Elias paused his work, wiping his hands on his trousers. He looked at Magnus, then at his angled frames. "The angle is steep enough to shed most dry snow, Magnus, and I have reinforced the frames." Magnus shook his head, gesturing at the whole bizarre construction. "But you are wasting the light. You've pointed your windows at the ground. And what happens in summer, when the sun is high and fierce? You will turn your home into an oven. You will cook your family alive." It was a sound, logical argument based on generations of experience. A vertical window was a compromise that worked reasonably well year-round. This, this was an extreme solution, and extremes were dangerous in the mountains. Elias offered a small, quiet smile. In summer, the sun is high in the sky. It will not enter. The roof will shield it. He pointed to the eaves of his roof, which he had extended by a precise amount. It was another calculation from his notebook. It is only for the winter sun, the one we need most. Magnus stared, unconvinced. The idea was too foreign, too academic. It was a clockmaker's solution, an idea born of paper and ink, not of stone and timber. It will not work, he said, not as a prediction, but as a fact. He turned and walked away, the respect in his voice replaced by a somber finality. The mockery from the rest of the village was less formal. At the tavern, men joked that Elias was trying to grow potatoes indoors in December. Children would walk past his cottage, shielding their eyes and pretending to be blinded by the non-existent glare from his sun trap. The project, now fully named Vogel's Folly, became a local spectacle, a cautionary tale about the dangers of too much education and not enough common sense. But what they saw was only the surface. The angled glass was just one part of a larger, invisible engine that Elias was building into the very fabric of his home. Behind the glass, he left an air gap of precisely 10 centimeters, and behind that gap, he did not build a normal wooden wall. He constructed a wall of thick, dark river stone, meticulously mortared, and painted a flat, light-absorbing black. This was the heart of his machine. It was a thermal battery. The system he had designed was an elegant loop of physics, a silent, passive furnace powered by the sun. First, the low-angled winter sunlight would pass through the tilted glass with minimal reflection. It would strike the black stone wall directly, and the dark surface would absorb the solar radiation, converting light into heat. The stone would warm up steadily throughout the day, even on the coldest, clearest days. The air in the 10-centimeter gap between the glass and the hot stone would become superheated, far hotter than the air in the room. This trapped hot air would naturally want to rise. Elias had engineered this desire. Near the bottom of the black stone wall, he had built a small vent that opened into the cottage's living space. Near the top, another vent. It was a classic convection circuit. The cooler, denser air from the floor of the room would be drawn into the bottom vent. It would then flow up through the superheated air gap, gaining warmth from the sun-drenched stone. This newly heated, less dense air would then exit through the top vent back into the room, creating a continuous, silent current of warm air. It was a lung for the house, breathing in cold air and exhaling warmth, powered by nothing more than a sunbeam. At night, when the sun was gone, the system would reverse its function. The heavy stone wall, now saturated with a full day's worth of solar energy, would begin to slowly radiate its stored heat back into the living space, keeping the cottage warm long after sunset. The glass and the air gap acted as a layer of insulation, preventing that precious heat from escaping back into the frigid night. And Magnus's fear of a summer oven? Elias had solved that with simple geometry. The carefully calculated roof overhang acted as a perfect seasonal filter. In winter, when the sun was low, its rays passed completely under the overhang to strike the glass. But in summer, when the sun was high overhead, the overhang cast the entire glass and stone wall in deep shadow. The engine would simply shut itself off for the season. It was a complete self-regulating system, a machine with no moving parts. The villagers saw a man tilting windows. Elias Vogel saw a heat engine, and he had just finished turning his house into one. Then December came. It arrived not with a blizzard, but with a terrifying stillness. A mass of Arctic air, dense and heavy, descended from the north and settled over the Alps. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, but the sun was a powerless mirage. The air did not move. No wind blew. There was only the cold, a profound and penetrating cold that seemed to draw the very life out of the world. The old-timers called it an iron frost. The temperature at dawn on the first day was minus 20 degrees Celsius. By sunset, it was minus 25. The next day, it fell further, and the next. The village was locked in the grip of a once-in-a-generation cold snap. The normal rhythms of life ground to a halt. The constant comforting sound of axes fell silent. It was too cold to work outside for long, and the frozen wood was as hard as stone, shattering under the blade. The community began to suffer. Families huddled in a single room, stuffing rags into every crack and crevice. They burned through their wood piles at a terrifying rate, the hungry Cachalofans demanding more and more fuel just to keep the indoor temperature from dropping below freezing. Livestock, normally safe in their barns, began to perish from the cold. Desperate farmers brought their most valuable animals into their own homes. The windows of every cottage, save one, were opaque, covered in a thick, impenetrable layer of interior frost. The cold was winning. It was slowly, inexorably, squeezing the life and warmth out of the valley. Magnus Steiner felt a growing dread. His own home, a model of sound construction, was failing him. Despite having one of the largest wood piles in the village, he saw it shrinking with alarming speed. He and his wife wore their thickest wool coats indoors. They could see their breath in the main room, even with the masonry stove glowing a dull red. His expertise, his life's work, was proving inadequate against this level of cold. His certainty had become his prison. A dark thought began to gnaw at him, a thought born of guilt. He thought of Elias Vogel. He thought of the man's wife, Anna, and their two small children. He pictured those ridiculous, flimsy sheets of angled glass. In this cold, they must have shattered. The folly must have failed. And if it had, the family would have had no chance. The thought that his own pride, his dismissal of a neighbor's strange idea, might have contributed to a tragedy was a weight he could not bear. He had to know. Stay with me, because what Magnus finds inside that cottage will not only shatter his world view, but will also provide the undeniable quantitative proof that changes everything for this entire community. Hit that like button right now if you're ready for the vindication. Pulling on his heaviest coat and wrapping a wool scarf over his face, Magnus stepped out into the brutal cold. The air was so frigid it felt sharp in his lungs, a physical pain with every breath. The short walk across the village square to Elias's cottage felt like a perilous expedition. The snow under his boots squeaked with a dry, alien sound that only happened in the deepest cold. He saw no one. The village was shuttered, hunkered down, waiting for the siege to end. He reached the small cottage and paused. From the outside, it looked no different from any other, except for the bizarre sloping windows on its southern face. There was no smoke curling from the chimney. That was what truly terrified him. No smoke meant no fire, and no fire meant no hope. With a heavy heart and a deep sense of foreboding, he raised a gloved hand and knocked on the solid oak door. He expected a long wait, perhaps no answer at all, but after only a moment, he heard the bolt slide back, the door swung open, and Magnus Steiner was hit by a physical force. It was not a blast of wind or a person. It was a wave of warmth, a dry, clean, impossible warmth that washed over his frozen face and instantly began to melt the ice crystals on his beard. Elias Vogel stood in the doorway, and he was in his shirt sleeves. Magnus stared, speechless. His mind, grounded in a lifetime of practical experience, could not process the scene before him. Elias smiled gently. "Magnus, come in. It is too cold to stand outside." He stepped across the threshold, and it was like entering another world, another season. The air inside was not just warm, it was comfortable, it was alive. It smelled of baking bread and drying herbs, not of acrid pine smoke. He looked at Elias's wife, Anna, who was kneading dough on the kitchen table, her sleeves also rolled up past her elbows. Then he saw the most impossible thing of all. On the wooden floor, bathed in a soft light from the angled windows, sat Elias's two young children. They were playing with wooden blocks. They were barefoot in the middle of the iron frost. Magnus slowly unwrapped the scarf from his face, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at the windows. There was no frost on them, not a single speck of ice. Through the clear, angled glass, he could see the sunlit, frozen world outside, but he felt none of its menace. As a builder, his instincts took over. This was a puzzle that defied the laws of his world, and he had to understand it. He walked, almost in a trance, to the north wall of the cottage, the wall that faced the coldest winds. In his own home, this wall was coated with a thin layer of ice. He pressed his palm against it. It was cool, yes, but it was not cold. It was not leaching the warmth out of the room. His gaze then fell upon the source of the impossible heat, the black stone wall. It stood silent and massive behind the angled glass, bathed in the pale winter sunlight. There was no fire, no smoke, no noise, yet heat poured from it in a steady, radiant river. He reached out a hand, tentatively, and touched its surface. It was shockingly warm, like a baker's hearth, hours after the fire has gone out. He could feel the deep, stored energy within it. He noticed the vents, the small opening at the bottom, from which a slight, cool draft was being drawn, and the one at the top, from which a steady current of truly hot air was rising, shimmering as it mixed with the air of the room. He finally understood. He was not standing in a house. He was standing inside an engine. He turned his attention to the wood box tucked away next to the small, unlit Kachelofen. He expected to see it empty, perhaps to find that Elias had been burning furniture to achieve this miracle. The wood box was nearly full. It held a neat, orderly stack of split pine and birch, enough for a normal week perhaps, but a trivial amount in this great cold. He turned to Elias, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The fire! Where is the fire?" "I have not lit the main stove in 3 days," Elias said calmly. "We light a small fire on the cook stove in the morning to boil water for coffee, and again in the evening for our meal. That is all." The numbers began to spin in Magnus's head. The data was landing like a series of physical blows. His own family was burning through a massive stack of wood every 24 hours just to keep the temperature hovering around 5 degrees. Elias was using perhaps a tenth of that, and his family was living in what felt like summer. The temperature difference between outside and inside had to be more than 40 degrees Celsius. The performance was not just better, it was an order of magnitude beyond anything he had ever considered possible. The numbers were undeniable. They were revolutionary. Magnus Steiner, the most respected builder in the valley, a man whose word was as solid as the foundations he laid, looked at the quiet clockmaker. He felt the foundations of his own world crack. All his experience, all his hard-won knowledge, all the traditions passed down through generations. They were all wrong. He had mocked this man. He had called his genius folly. The shame was as intense as the warmth in the room. "Elias," Magnus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I was wrong. I was a fool." He took a step closer, his eyes not on the children or the bacon bread, but on the silent black wall. This sun engine, you must teach me. You must teach us all." When the iron frost finally broke, the story of what Magnus Steiner had witnessed inside Vogel's Folly spread through the village like a wildfire. It was a tale of impossible warmth, of barefoot children, of a nearly full woodbox in the face of the worst cold in living memory. It was a legend, backed by the testimony of the village's most unshakable skeptic. The mockery died overnight, replaced by a wave of awe and curiosity. The name Vogel's Folly was never spoken again. Instead, people began to talk of the Vogel window, or, more simply, the sun engine. Delegations of villagers began to arrive at Elias's door, not to jeer, but to learn. Elias, true to his nature, sought no fame or credit. He simply answered their questions. He shared the pages of his notebook, explaining the angles, the importance of the air gap, the critical role of the thermal mass. He spoke not of magic, but of physics, of convection and radiation, translating the academic language of the observatory into the practical terms of a builder. His most important student was Magnus Steiner, the master builder, humbled and inspired, through his formidable energy and reputation, into championing the new design. That spring, a revolution in construction began in the small valley. Magnus, working from Elias's principles, supervised the retrofitting of 3 homes, adapting the design to their specific structures. They chiseled vents into existing stone walls. They built insulated boxes around windows to create the correct angle. They experimented with different materials for the thermal mass. Some used stone, others a thick wall of rammed earth and clay. Each new construction was a slight variation, an adaptation to the local reality, but the core principles remained the same. The following winter was a normal one, cold and long, but not brutal. Yet the difference in the retrofitted homes was profound. Their owners reported cutting their firewood consumption by more than half. Their homes were warmer, drier, and healthier. The news of this success solidified the revolution. Over the next decade, the architecture of the valley transformed. No new home was built without a Vogel window. Old cottages were painstakingly updated. The south-facing walls of the village, once a uniform facade of wood and vertical glass, became a mosaic of angled panes, all tilted at that one specific, life-altering degree. Elias Vogel became a quiet, respected teacher. He never patented his design or sought payment for his knowledge. His reward was seeing the change in his community. It was the sight of smoke curling from chimneys only in the morning and evening, not all day long. It was the sound of children playing, their laughter no longer raspy with coughs from the damp, smoky air. The true impact wasn't measured in degrees Celsius or in cords of wood saved. It was measured in human dignity. It was an elderly couple, able to live out their years in their own home without fear of the winter cold. It was a mother who no longer had to choose between a warm house and saving enough wood for the end of the season. It was the simple, profound luxury of a family being able to move freely through their own home in the dead of winter, not being tethered to the single warm spot in front of the stove. It was measured in babies who survived their first, most vulnerable winter. The story of Elias Vogel is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come not from the experts, but from an outsider who sees the world through a different lens. It teaches that tradition, for all its strength, can sometimes be a barrier to innovation. The villagers saw a vertical window as the only way to build. Elias, the clockmaker, understood that the universe operates on angles and arcs, and that by aligning oneself with those fundamental laws, one could harness a power far greater than 1,000 fires. His quiet observation and unwavering belief in the data of his own calculations brought a new kind of warmth to his community, one that radiated far beyond the walls of his own small home. This principle, of course, did not remain locked in a single Alpine valley. The concepts Elias Vogel so elegantly demonstrated, maximizing winter solar gain with angled glazing, storing that energy in thermal mass, preventing summer overheating with calculated overhangs, and driving natural convection, are the foundational pillars of modern passive solar design. The sun engine is now known as a trombe wall, a key feature in sustainable and energy-efficient architecture around the world. So the next time you see a building with strange angled windows or a large sun-facing glass wall, remember the quiet clockmaker from the Alps. Remember that his simple, powerful idea proved that the solution to our greatest challenges often lies in working with nature, not fighting against it. If this story changed the way you think about a simple window, hit that like button to help spread this knowledge, and subscribe for more stories of forgotten frontier wisdom that still resonate today. What's the coldest winter you've ever had to face? Let me know in the comments below. The story you have just heard is a fictionalized account created for educational and entertainment purposes. While the engineering and physics principles of passive solar design, thermal mass, and angled glazing are very real and historically significant, the characters, specific events, and location are products of imagination. This narrative is intended to illustrate these technical concepts in a compelling historical context and does not constitute professional engineering or construction advice.